Hello and welcome to our daily sketching routine. It is Monday, April the 14th, 2025, and today's topic, I'm going to call it drawing anatomy for characters. I'm going to erase that anyway, but just as a note. Yeah, it's a part of a deep dive into drawing character model sheets. I've got this one, which is a male character, and then I worked on this page, which is pretty much done. Here's the female, and I'll link to the videos. It's been basically a step-by-step process. It's a deep dive, as I call it, which is where I focus for several days over the same topic. And once these are inked, I'll post them on the community section of the channel just as a reference, just kind of a helpful guide. It's not really, this is sort of like the way I do it, or like the style that I use. Before we begin, welcome if you're new, and welcome back if you're returning. I sketch and post every day, and I use a timer to stay focused and to build a habit. It may take a little while, but I just think the information is helpful. But yeah, I think first it starts with having good sound information that will immediately help you. So with that in mind, I wanted to talk about the 80-20 rule, which I like. It's just this concept that I like to use. So for example, if it takes, let's just say for an example, it took about a couple hours maybe to draw this, and it took about 20 minutes to do the proportions, which is what this is, and that's what the other videos I'll link to as part of the deep dive. Let's say it takes 20 minutes to do this, but a couple hours to finish inking it. Those 20 minutes is really actually what makes the other part successful and makes it easier and makes it more enjoyable. It's kind of like a rule of thumb that I use. It's to figure out what is that 20% that will give me the 80% reward. So in this video, what I'll do is I kind of did that with when I started inking this. I have a video that kind of showed how I started to ink it, and so I'll do it a little bit more here. And I talked about overlapping forms. I have another video called that. It shows up a lot, and so I'm going to focus on that because I think it's pretty important, especially for anatomy, but I think in general it's important. On this page, I just used this fine point, maybe extra fine point, for this whole thing, which I think is good. I think I kind of went over areas, basically the overlap areas that I'm going to go over today. So I'm just going to go ahead and use a medium point, just because I'm going to talk about basically the areas where the line weights would be darker, and that's usually where the overlap of forms happens, and that because that's where it'll be the shadow and stuff. So part of this has to do with pen and ink technique. So for example, it's not as important if you're penciling it, unless you're going to go in and shade it the pencil. But when you're inking it, definitely if you want more life and more volume and stuff, and without overworking it, then yeah, it's pretty important to understand what the lines actually do, and that's why I like inking. So it's going to be, that's the main idea. In the other page, I sketched it out more, but you'll find that you can kind of skip some things, but I wouldn't do it until you actually know what you're drawing. That's the other thing I wanted to point out, was to get to the point where you can just kind of have sort of a basic sketch and then draw more detail, and especially for figure drawing. I studied anatomy from a book and from classes and stuff like that, but my point is that 20%, going back to the 80-20 rule, you might want to focus on studying anatomy, and by that I mean get a dedicated sketchbook or something, which is what I did, and find a good anatomy book. There's a lot out there, or whatever has anatomy, and then just sketch, do a certain amount per day. I just did a little bit because I think it's pretty dry and kind of boring, but if you kind of have a purpose for it, then such as knowing how to draw characters, then it's a little bit it's more interesting. So I'll go over that here, but my point is that that's 20% of, now you'll just be able to draw characters, which is for me the other 80% of what I do and why I do it. Well, I mean, one of the main goals of the channel is to help you learn how to draw. So let's talk about like overlapping forms. So this comes from knowing anatomy. In the other one, I talked about like the chin. So these are all proportions, and that's not really anatomy, but it comes from the anatomy. So that's going to overlap. I can even use this as kind of an example. And then so I'm just going to use this dark pen or a medium point. And since it's symmetrical, you sort of want to, that takes practice too, but that's also from like the proportion. But you sort of want to be patiently and like kind of methodical about that. So you're not really going to outline everything. Well, you can, but so another word for this is kind of like landmarks, but like not really, but it kind of is. There's landmarks involved. So for example, like that's a landmark, the collarbone. Another thing is, so you have your neck muscle and then the trapezius. And the reason I want to say that this will immediately improve your figure drawing is because, well, one, it's based off of anatomy, so that's why it's overlapping, and so it'll look more realistic. You could have started wherever. I usually just kind of start with like the head because that's kind of like the main thing you want to, sort of sets the tone. So the side of the head will overlap the ear. So notice I just care about like this, but like the proportions are there. And part of this is just getting used to explaining it, which is helpful for me too. These are just check the symmetry of it. It's more important just because it's so like front view. The clavicle, which is just like the collarbone. Now, instead of me sort of just showing, like demonstrating all of these, so part of it is I'll demonstrate it on this front view, but then when I post the finished drawing, that's what I would study. Like I would look at where did I overlap like the forms, and then like when you do your anatomy studies, then you can start to understand, like it's sort of like when you're looking at another artist's style and just seeing like why did they do what they did. And once you kind of know that, you can pretty much like see exactly what people are doing like all the time. So like the clavicle or collar, it's going to overlap the trapezius. So here, it's not so much about like the forms of the muscles, and I think like that's where it gets a little confusing for people learning this. So for example, like the pectorals, they have like different like striations and different parts to them. But I think what happens is, first of all, a lot of that isn't shown and a lot of that isn't necessary. Although, like I said, if you're learning anatomy, it's probably good just to kind of learn like the whole thing, just to sketch it and draw it. But a lot of times, and this is from like if you like do studies from photos and stuff, you'll just start to see like how it looks, the surface looks. So for example, this, the side will always be there because that form, which is like the pectoral muscles, will always overlap, like where the biceps, like the arms come out. but like the surface detail like may or may not be there, it may not matter. Same thing with if you want to work on like the neck. So if this is the jaw, then the neck muscles will be like behind the jaw, or like the chin. So I'm not too worried about, like, for example, like the shape. I can always go back and make that look nice. The main thing is I do want to keep things pretty symmetrical. So if I draw like that overlap, then I just want to make sure that it looks symmetrical, like close to it. It doesn't have to be exact, because like obviously people aren't exactly symmetrical either. Part of it is what's happening is I'm also creating kind of divisions for myself. One thing I wanted to show was how you can just use it as a guide. So that's, you can get like different body types, you can get different characters. So let's see, let's kind of keep moving on here. So for example, the deltoids. So I'll kind of talk about the anatomy again. This is what you would want to study, is to kind of know. So the deltoids are going to be, they're going to overlap the biceps, which is what gives you this look. So notice that it's the proportions that are giving you the boundaries, but of course the different like shapes could be different. The lower arm muscles will overlap the upper arm. Keep that in the camera. Like this. What else? Then when you get to like the wrist will overlap like the hand. I'm kind of exaggerating it, and you can exaggerate any of these. Some people it is more exaggerated, but notice like the proportions and the anatomy is basically the same, but then there's these exaggerations, but they're not really that, they can be pretty subtle and it would still look different. So for example, the wrist is going to overlap the thumb right here. So for example, I could draw this and it would overlap those are like the bones of the hand, like the metatarsals or something, or tarsals or something like that. So that's what this is going to represent. So there's proportion, but then the anatomy is what gives you that shape, because there's like the bones of the hands are in there. But the forms is what the overlap is talking about. Like this overlaps this one. Just like this, it overlaps the thumb area right here. It's on top of it, like from this view. And then the proportion, that's where we say like the fingers reach like mid-thigh when they're stretched out. That's like a proportion, and that's something you can measure. And so that's just like a proportion line right there. And the shape, like this, comes from the anatomy, because that's where the bones of the fingers are, and like the length of the fingers and stuff. So that's the anatomy of it. Same with like the thumb, we'll put it kind of like right here. But like this line, it overlaps the thumb. So it comes, so one, it makes the drawing look better, but then it's like a 20% thing that's going to help you in the future. So same with like proportion. So this is the knuckles, and the knuckles are in front of these other, like the small, like the fingers, like the smaller fingers. So kind of like that. Make sure they have enough fingers. Obviously study the hand, like it's the same principle, like the overlapping forms. But this isn't really about how to draw hands, but that's just like an example. Same with right here, the lats, like the torso. So the biceps overlap the lats, and then you have the like the side muscles here. So this is coming from proportion. It's also coming from anatomy. So along the sides here, it's not a ton of overlap, but if you had to, like this, the obliques, I guess, would overlap the hips, or like the pelvis. I believe the lats would overlap that, if you wanted to add that detail. Again, this isn't really meant to be like all the muscles, because it's more like a base figure to use for character design. I'm just gonna complete this. It's kind of the same thing with like the face. Every once in a while you might want to check your proportions. It's not too bad. It wants to like kind of skew a little bit, especially if you're kind of talking while you're doing it. The leg muscle, again, it's coming from the anatomy, but the proportion comes first, and that's what you like kind of study. You just sort of draw like the muscles, but then this is using it for like style, like the style you're going for. So from here, so this line was for the knees. The knees are squarish, but then kind of they come out, and so the leg muscle here is going to overlap the side of the knee. So I would say that I'm probably 80% correct, and sometimes I'll have to go back, or if I'm just looking at reference, I'll see something that was off. Like I could be incorrect, obviously, but if I can be like 80% correct, just kind of like if I can draw 80% of it just from imagination, that 20% will give it maybe more detail or more realism, but like 80% of it was from imagination, so it'll look more unique. So the other thing, so yeah, this is like an overlapping right here. Same with, let's say, the side of the knee. I believe you could probably get away with, it might be this way, I could be wrong, but you could do this. If that's incorrect, then do it the other way, like have the knee sort of go under. I'm gonna make it go like this. It doesn't look too weird. Yeah, sometimes you just kind of have to like experiment with it, and it's not like a huge deal. Yeah, like the more you study and like practice it, like the better. So from here, I would say that the calf here is probably gonna be over that, and then kind of like this. now moving down, the ankles, I'm gonna say that they kind of go this way. There's like a certain look to them, like kind of like this, I think. So what that means is that, yeah, like this is like the overlapping form right there. So the like top of the foot is under like the ankle area. So again, this is just coming from like proportion. So whenever you are doing anatomy studies, just figure out the best way to remember like the proportions. Like these aren't exact. These are just kind of, I mean, learn it like exactly, but then as you're drawing it, it'll just be sort of whatever. So this is like the top of the foot right here. Then the foot itself, or like the toes and stuff, overlap like that top part. I think Bridgman calls it like wedging, like it wedges. So that's like it's a good book to kind of study for kind of like what this is. I mean, it's a little different because I'm using it in the way that works for me. So in general, I'll just put like it also depends on what the character's doing. I'll put like the lower arm muscles, which is like the radialis muscles. But like so this is like the tricep on the side here. I'll put it underneath like the forearm muscle. Same with this, like the deltoid right here, like the triceps go under that. So I'll do this real quick. I know this video is a little bit long, to kind of show you how it is different depending on like the view, but like it helps to kind of understand like the forms. So for example, it's like the details will be a little different. That's why you want to study like reference. So for example, the trapezius, for example, like in the side view, let's say that this is the trapezius. Now the way this looks, you probably want to look at something, but like it all looks different. Like some people have more muscle definition and sometimes it's not as obvious and stuff like that. So the trapezius will be over like the neck muscle, and the clavicle will be there, and then the neck goes into that, so that you get those kind of overlapping forms with the deltoids. And you can kind of use this as like helpful, but like it's gonna have some different shapes. So for example, the deltoids are here, the biceps, so that's what's happening here. The biceps are coming from underneath. So the deltoids are like this, and then the triceps are coming from underneath, which is what this is supposed to be. Now sometimes it's just a darker line that does it, but that's what that's representing. The back muscle, that's what that is. But like obviously you can't see it here, but that's kind of like the latissimus, I guess, the lats. So that's what's happening there. As far as like the pectorals, so we're saying that the biceps come out from underneath. So let's just go ahead and represent that right here. So we'll represent the biceps coming out from underneath so these are kind of like landmarks, obviously. It's just like a bunch of different things. They're just different tips. This will look different. I mean, that's just depends on the person, the pectoral itself. Same with this, like sometimes the ribs are more obvious. Then this is the abdominals. Again, that looks different for people. See this part? the obliques. Might not be that obvious in the side view. I'm adding these sort of mainly for character design purposes, but I'll go back in and do that later. Forearm muscle. The biceps go into that. So over here, you kind of, again, need to know anatomy. So you have the triceps, but then you have the elbow right here, which is like a bone. And then, again, with the forearm muscles generally, we'll go over it. And then for the wrist, I like to show myself that there's a wrist right here, and then that's where like the hand comes out, the hand bones. And then this part of the hand overlaps where the thumb goes. So those are the forms. I guess I'll go ahead and do this profile since we've got this far. So the thigh is sort of in front. Same with this, the hamstrings. Again, I'm not so much talking about like the form. It all looks different anyway, and that's really what you would study, is like what the actual muscles are doing. But like the front of the thigh, where like the knee, I would put the knee underneath it. Kind of like this, because the knee is sort of set in there. And then you've got like the back part of the knee, which could go under, because this hamstring is sort of attached to like the outside or something, something like that. And then the calf muscle will be kind of over it. So the knee is sort of like inside there. So you kind of want to show like that overlap. And then from here, you have like the ankle. So that's a form right here. And then the foot. So the heel is going to be behind whatever like this part of the foot is. But it's like kind of subtle. And plus, a lot of times they're going to have shoes and stuff. But it's sort of a little bit behind it. The form, because there's like foot muscles right here on the outside of the foot. And then kind of like this. So you have a form right here. So the foot is sort of inside, like the ankle area. It's like coming from underneath it. Let's finish up with like this profile here. So the jaw is going to be, and that's kind of how you can have a more defined jaw. I mean, if the jaw is like pretty defined, then it's going to be in front of the neck. Sometimes if there's more smoothness here, you don't have to draw that. This part isn't too complicated. this part is just like drawing the head. Well, that'll kind of wrap up today's video. The same thing here. Obviously, just look at something, but like that would help. This video will be too long if I start working on this one. It's basically the same. I mean, there's obviously differences, but that's what the reference will help out with. But yeah, hopefully, I wasn't really sure what I would go over in this video, but like hopefully that was helpful. I want to thank you for joining me for our daily sketching routine, and if you enjoy these videos, please support the channel. I appreciate it, and until next time, keep on sketching.